in deference to a man who's on the front lines every day, I am going to pass the microphone to this fine gentleman, a sheriff that we all know and love, who defends our freedoms every day. So we're going to give him a great round of applause and let him start the panel.
Thank you. Ms. Fiorina? Carly? All right. That was out of respect. I have a lot of admiration and respect for Carly and what she's done, her history. If you don't know what it is, Google it. It's a tremendous story of her life and rise in the business community, and now she's thinking of taking on this. She's thinking about it. Okay. I didn't commit you. This thing we call the Presidency of the United States. Count on it. Count on it. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. You know, you had choices here. You could have done a lot of things other than be here. The fact that you are here means something to me, okay, because we're going to talk about some really important stuff. It isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but I'll tell you what, when it comes to the threats that we face in this post-9/11 world, that thing called intelligence, national security intelligence, homeland security intelligence, is at the heart of what it's going to take, and we got to get better at it, and that's what I'm going to talk about. The other ones will talk mainly about how the thing is structured and why, but I want to talk about some of the shortcomings of this, our effort in the United States to produce this thing called intelligence. Very quickly, on just shout-out answers, we don't need to, we'll dispense with the formalities for this afternoon. Why do we have intelligence? National security intelligence. Okay, anybody else? Security. All right. Two things, and those that shouted out answers kind of hit on it. The reason why we have and why we need produce intelligence for national security is to prevent strategic surprise. What is strategic surprise? Pearl Harbor, fall of the Berlin Wall, the breakup of the Soviet Union, the the Six-Day War, the preemptive attack, all were missed by United States intelligence. Okay, it's not a perfect science. 9/11 is the most recent. All right, there's this phrase used, we fail to connect the dots. The first thing I want to emphasize, though, is as it relates to intelligence, I said it's not an exact science. All right, it's not perfect. It's not really about a prediction. What it does, the second thing that it does is that it advises policymakers, decision makers about threats facing the world, who the enemy is, what are the enemy's capabilities? Because the United States has a lot of enemies that just don't really have the capability to attack. So what are their capabilities and what are their plans? Are they planning an attack? And these are things that this intelligence community is responsible for, that on a daily basis produces these reports that are disseminated. Okay, there's a collection step. There's the analysis step. Then there's the reporting, and then the dissemination. But the goal of intelligence is to get a policymaker or decision maker to act, not just to read a report, to act or not to act, because to not act is to act, okay? Preemptive strike maybe, so on and so forth. So there's a little misunderstanding, I think, in the general public when it comes to that, you know, why do we have intelligence failures? Well, because this is an imperfect world. But the goal is to prevent strategic surprise or strategic attack. So, I think we need a working definition, too, of the term intelligence, national security intelligence. The one I like, it's information that meets the stated or understood needs of policymakers and has been collected, processed, analyzed, and disseminated. So in other words, some of this could come from a policymaker that says, hey, I need to know what are the threats, for instance, in the Middle East. That's right in front of us today. Who are the enemies? What are their capabilities? Are they planning? Okay, that's the definition I like. I studied this stuff. I have a master's degree. It doesn't make me an expert, but I have a keen interest in it. My master's degree is from the United States Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, and it's in security studies from the Center of Homeland Defense and Security. So like I said, I don't know everything about this, but I have studied and I have an interest. And I just want to share a little of what I know and understand with you today. I prepared a literature review. I'll start reading some of this. I've looked at a lot of stuff, books, journals, essays from people smarter than me, experts in the field, and how we can make this intelligence community, these 15, 16 or so agencies, disparate agencies, I might add, with different cultures, different goals. How can we take these and fuse them together so that we don't miss strategic surprise? Okay? So if you want, take my email address down. It's the letter D, Clarke, C-L-A-R-K-E, .cowboy. Go figure, huh? At Gmail. And if you want any of this, just drop me an email. I'll get it to you. And any other information. I put a bibliography together as well. I'll get that to you, some resource material for you. If you have a continued interest in this, and it's dominating the news now, and it will for some time now, with the flare-up with ISIS and some of the other threats, Syria, Iran, and their nuclear capability or potential. It's important stuff. And then I'll end with, how do we make national security relevant to the 21st century? Because our intelligence structure, our intelligence agencies were really built for the threats of the 20th century, which were nation-state driven, right? The Soviet Union was a big one, China. And it's been a slow, ever since September 11th anyway, it's been a slow process in trying to get this intelligence community to be able to deal with and understand the threats of the 21st century, which are not nation states anymore, right? Terrorist groups, they're not nation states. They don't wear uniforms. You can't watch things like troop formations that you could do with satellite intelligence. For instance, usually if there was an attack, there was a troop buildup somewhere, the Soviet Union, and you could get a beat on that early on, and the mobilization has to happen before an attack. I mean, how did we miss Russia invading or going into Ukraine? And we missed it. All right? There obviously had to be a mobilization of troops, and so those threats of the 20th century were a little easier to keep an eye on. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. And I remember the 9/11 Commission report, some of the testimony on the Hill, where it was testified to and discovered that when the 9/11 attack struck, we had no spies in the Middle East. And the reason we didn't, how do you transcend the language barrier? How do you we had analysts, nobody could speak Arabic. All right? How do you transcend the customs, the traditions in that culture? to have an understanding so that when you're, as an analyst, when you get information in or you're communicating with the collectors of the evidence, how do you go back and say, hey, I got this here, I need you to do a little more, and here's what I need you to do, and also to be able to interpret the information you get based on an understanding of the language, customs, and the traditions in those countries. Okay, huge problem. And we're still struggling with that today. Congress has tried. There have been no less than 10 commissions authorized by Congress to try to force change in the intelligence community. Each of these commissions has come up with recommendations. Very few of them have been implemented. They go back to what they're comfortable with. They go back to their own cultures. And because of that, I mean, that in part is why there's been this slow going in making our intelligence community better able to deal with 21st century threats. All right, so let me go through. I'll just read a couple pages here. Like I said, I'll get this to you because other folks are going to want to say something too. And then I'll go quickly into some bullets on how do we make this relevant to the 21st century, okay? Since 1947, the passage of the National Security Act, which created an intelligence structure to produce security estimates for federal government policymakers, much has been written about the need for reform within that intelligence community. Reform efforts began almost as soon as the act was implemented. In an article from The Economist, 6 experienced intelligence community practitioners agreed the overall structure of America's intelligence community needs an overhaul. Most of the Reform Commission recommendations followed a catastrophic failure to warn the President of the United States in a timely fashion of an attack against the homeland. Intelligence failure, its causes, and whether or not they are avoidable is a separate area of study that will not be examined here. What will be examined is literature regarding a history of the major intelligence reforms, beginning with the 1947 National Security Act, the ongoing debate following the 9/11 attacks, the Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, which is the most recent legislative effort to revamp the intelligence community. Within that framework will be a review of why the intelligence community, IC, continues to be plagued by Cold War thinking and structural barriers that inhibit effective operation and information sharing, and why substantial change continues to be elusive within the IC. One examination of reform efforts points out that 340 recommendations have been put forth by numerous commissions between 1991 and 2001, and of those 340 recommendations, only 35 have been implemented, and only to some degree. You see how tough it's been to change the culture in these disparate agencies. So that leaves about 268 or 79%, resulting in no action whatsoever. 6 years after 9/11, the intelligence community's worst deficiencies have not substantially improved. This isn't, I footnoted all this for you, because I said these people are smarter than me. And I've just put together a literature review for you that you can read on your own. Other literature suggesting that policy and not structural changes are needed has been promoted by Professor Angelo Codevilla, who believes that nothing in the 9/11 Commission report shows how organizational changes within the IC will better safeguard America. He points out that rearranging resources into boxes and placing labels on them does not produce good outcomes. He makes the claim that intelligence reforms must begin from the premise that intelligence and strategy go hand in hand. The task of reforming the IC has been described by him as mission impossible. I'll end that part of it, and I'll go into a few bullet points on how we have to make intelligence, the intelligence community, relevant for 21st century threats. First of all, we got to focus on a couple areas. We have to continue to better develop analysts. All right, that's the heart and soul of the intelligence process. The people that put these reports together and disseminate them to the policymakers. We have to use a more broad array of sources, especially open source materials like social media. Obviously, the enemy is using the internet to fundraise, and they're using the internet, Facebook, other social media entities to recruit for radicalization. Okay, that's one thing that often gets left out. You know, this is a world of secrets, intelligence. But there's a lot of information on the open source where you don't need search warrants, not necessarily. You just go to these websites and see what they're doing. What are they talking about? Are they planning an attack? Another thing is we have to create an intelligence product that can be shared with a wider range of consumers. Like I said, this stuff is heavily steeped in secrets. You need security clearances, top security clearances to share a lot of this information that in the 21st century, that's a 20th century procedure if you ask me. So we can share this with more organizations, get the private sector involved. I mean, there is a need for secrets, and there's a need for stuff to be classified as top secret, but everything seems to be classified in top secret. Every time somebody goes to the Hill to testify, and they're asked a question by an oversight committee in Congress, you'll hear the infamous, you know, the rest of that is classified. I can't really get into that because it's classified. And there is a need for that. And then finally, the last thing we need to get better at is we need to avoid focusing on a hierarchical structure, because most terrorist organizations don't have a hierarchy. All right, some of them do. I mean, for the most part, we know that they have a leader, and that's about it. Whereas with the nation states, when those were the threats, it's pretty structured with a hierarchy. That doesn't exist anymore. All right, so that's just a snapshot. My view, that's all. It's just one person's view who has studied this. Not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I do play a role in Homeland Security in my community. Obviously, local law enforcement has now been made a partner where we weren't prior to 9/11. Things like fusion centers, and of which we're a member of. So we play a critical role. So I think that my education in this is going to benefit not just Milwaukee County, but things like this, where I can come out and talk about these things. We can challenge each other to try to make this IC do what it's supposed to do, and it's protect America. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheriff. That was outstanding. And of course, the sheriff, I think, represents the best of our first line of defense, our intelligence community. I agree with everything he said. I come at it from a slightly different perspective, point of view. I haven't served on the front lines as he has, but for several years I served as the chairman of the advisory board at the Central Intelligence Agency, and worked with the brave men and women of the CIA post 9/11 as they tried to do many of the things that the sheriff was just talking about. And I want to start by saying that from personal experience, I believe that the men and women of the intelligence community, whether it's in the CIA or whether it's in the Department of Defense intelligence agencies, where I've always also worked with those folks, these are dedicated people who are spending enormous amounts of time and energy to try and produce a better set of intelligence outcomes for decision makers. And I think you saw the dedication of the sheriff to play his part. I mean, my goodness, he's gotten a master's degree, he's done research, he's providing bibliographies. This is obviously a man, like so many others in the community, that care deeply. I would also then quickly add, however, that in my experience, the intelligence community is in as desperate need of fundamental government reform as any other aspect of government. And in some ways, that's unsurprising, because government, including the intelligence community, is a big bureaucracy. And big bureaucracies have some common characteristics, whether they're at the Department of Health and Human Services, or the CIA, or the DNI, or the Department of Defense, or whether they're bureaucracies in a big company like AT&T or HP. And the sheriff hit on one of the most important aspects of a bureaucracy. What is a bureaucracy? It is a hierarchical, rules-based, process-intensive organization in which, by tradition and by rule, information flows up and decision-making flows down. That worked really, really well for a long time, but it doesn't work so well anymore. Forget our enemies for a second. That rules-based, process-intensive, hierarchical organization, how well does that work in an age now where information is disseminated like that? Remember that the iPhone, it's hard to believe this, but the iPhone was introduced in 2007. It's less than a decade ago. And yet what that technology has done is allow, actually for the first time in human history, anyone to get any piece of information anytime they choose. So it's this tremendous tool for empowerment, it's a tremendous tool for democratization, but it's a tremendous tool as well for radicalization. And what happens now is these bureaucracies, whatever kind they are, they have a hard time keeping up with this rapid dissemination of information. And so our enemies, who start out with very few assets and big ambitions, what do? They take advantage of the tools and the technology that are available to them. Or think about it another way. Remember when we were in Iraq and one of the most devastating weapons against us and against our troops was not the sophisticated weaponry that we were deploying. I mean, we won on that stuff. How were they killing and maiming our troops? With improvised explosive devices. They didn't have a lot of sophistication. They used what they had, and they took advantage of our sophistication by surprising us with something very simple, but very deadly. Bureaucracies have this characteristic that they are slow moving because information flows up, decisions flow down. Bureaucracies have this characteristic where people protect their turf. Any of you work in a bureaucracy? Yeah. Well, what happens in bureaucracies is people protect their turf. So imagine this turf protection going on in an intelligence community. The sheriff's absolutely right. People protect their turf. And of course, that's risen to a fine art in the intelligence community because for many, many decades, you didn't know something unless you had a need to know. So here we have a situation now where the most important thing we can do is share information, not protect information. Where the most important thing we can do is rapidly disseminate information instead of slow the dissemination now down because of a slow decision-making process. And where in many ways the most important thing we can do in order to prevent strategic surprise, as the sheriff was speaking about, is to find patterns. To find patterns. In other words, the isolated piece of intelligence may not be as important as a pattern that is revealed over time, a pattern of intention, a pattern of action, a pattern of direction. It's interesting to me that one of the first things that we did post 9/11 in order to reform the intelligence community was to create another big bureaucracy. So what did we do? We said, oh, we failed, and we created the Department of National Intelligence. That sort of now became a super bureaucracy over lots of intelligence agencies. And you may remember that there was a lot of controversy over that. You may remember many former CIA directors and current ones said this isn't going to help us. All we're doing is creating yet another rung in the decision-making process. And I must say, I can remember serving as the chairman of that advisory board and looking at the amount of information requests, budget requests that were coming from DNI to the CIA. I mean, literally, you know, please fill out this much paperwork and tell us how you're spending your budget. It's not that people didn't intend that well. It's that filling out all that paperwork does nothing to actually find the right intelligence because we have the right analysts. The sheriff is also right. Finding the right analysts with the language skills and all of those things that are critically important is very difficult. But it didn't help do any of that. It didn't help break down barriers. It didn't help share information. It created the need for more paperwork, more hierarchy. That's a pretty maybe grim assessment. I don't mean it to be. But I think we have to recognize that the structure of our government is, by definition, less and less effective in the 21st century. There's no getting around the fact that technology is moving us to a horizontal world where information is shared rapidly. There's no getting around the fact that our enemies have high ambition and therefore they will take advantage of all of the capability that's out there. And you don't need to build something brand new or have a sophisticated weapon to do a lot of damage. We've figured that out. And so the very nature of the structure of our government agencies now, I believe, is standing in the way of the kind of reforms that we need to undertake, which is why I believe that ultimately we are going to have to undertake fundamental reform. Unless that is too dire an assessment, I will come all the way back to what I said at the very beginning, and then I'll stop talking here and we can take questions. We have extraordinary men and women who worry about the safety of our nation every single day. That is our greatest asset. People who understand the nature of the threat, as the sheriff does, people who have deep love for their country, people who spend inordinate hours worrying about whether or not we are doing the right things. Those people are our greatest assets. And now I think we have to recognize that the structures and the bureaucracies and the traditions, those are the things that are now getting in the way. So we have to imagine, I think, a fundamental reform. So with that, I'm going to stop and questions.
Carly, I'm your next speaker.
Well, wonderful. Gosh, you're here.
I am here.
I'm so sorry.
I will,
Great. Have a step back.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for being here. I'm going to go through perhaps what is maybe not quite as interesting a presentation as you just heard from the sheriff and Ms. Fiorina. But this is going to be more a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what is the intelligence community, how is it structured, what are its constituent agencies, and what do they do. So I think we go till 3:10, is that right? Yes? So I will make sure that I allow enough time so that you all can have some time for questions as well. Everything in here that I'm going to tell you is unclassified. It is all from the open source world. Up here on the table, I have a little holder with cards in it. If you would like to get this presentation afterwards or to contact me and follow up for any questions, please come and take a card. My email and contact information are on there. All right, this is a little bit about my own background. I am Clare Lopez, currently serving as the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy, a think tank here in Washington, D.C. But I began my own professional life after graduate school with, I don't think that shows on the screen, it doesn't, with the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, during which period of time I received the letter, the offer letter that I was actually waiting for, and that came from the CIA. So night before graduation, I went into the captain and I said, I have a better offer, they pay more money, and I don't have to wear green for the rest of my life. And off I went to the CIA, where I served for the next 20 years. I served domestically and abroad. My focus at that time was on the Soviet Union and Russia, and that was for the entirety of my service, focused on Russia and the Soviet Union. These are some of the other organizations that I'm a part of. I won't belabor it, but it is mostly nonprofit and from the think tank world. All right, let me show you sort of a graphic of the constituent agencies that make up the intelligence community. As you can see, there are quite a few of them. There are 17. I promise I won't go slogging through every one of them, but just you can take a look here at what some of them are. Let's begin with some of these terms you may have heard. You hear it on the news sometimes. The INTs, right? Cybint, GeoInt, HUMINT, IMINT. Some of the most commonly used include, of course, HUMINT, which means the collection of information from people, directly from people, person to person. And that's what I did. I was an operations officer. I was an undercover case officer for the CIA, and I worked in HUMINT. I was a collector. I collected the information that Fiorina was talking about. The analysts then would take, combine, and write up into reports that would be useful to decision makers, meaning in Congress, the executive branch, and so forth. But many other INTs here. Let me point to SIGINT down there near the bottom. And that's what the National Security Agency does, picks up technical intelligence using technical means, which has been much in the news of late. But in any case, that's the list there. So the U.S. intelligence community today is comprised of 17 different agencies. Some of them are very old and go back to the founding years of our republic. And, for instance, the first one on that list before there, the Cyber Command, was just stood up a very short while ago. The intelligence community, of course, is headed by the Director of National Intelligence, as you just heard, which was an office that came into being after the attacks of 9/11, with the intent of organizing and bringing some cohesion to this sprawling community. But of course, as you heard as well, many would look at it as simply now another layer of bureaucracy that is not necessarily working out the way it might have been planned in the beginning. The intelligence community is headed, of course, by the Director of National Intelligence, but he then sits on something called the National Security Council. The National Security Council is a body comprised of the top advisors to the President on security matters. It was formed in 1947, right after the end of World War II, and obviously its primary purpose is to advise and assist the President in national security and foreign policy issues. It's chaired by the President, includes all the top cabinet level secretaries, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and so forth. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be the military representative to the National Security Council. Today that would be General Martin E. Dempsey. And the Director of National Intelligence, of course, is also the primary #1 intelligence advisor to the President. Of course, today that is General James Clapper. So let's just begin with some of these. I will not go through every single one, but you can see them. Office of the National Intelligence Director, the ODNI, formed, as you can see there, in the wake of 9/11, 2005. And that is supposed to be, again, an organizing, overarching administrative body that helps to share, collaborate, and make sense out of the sprawling intelligence community. The CIA, where I served for 20 years, is one of the primary members of the intelligence community, obviously formed again right after World War II. And there was an act of 1947 that brought it and some other organizations into existence. The CIA collects, analyzes, disseminates intelligence gathered on foreign nations, groups, individuals, as you heard the sheriff say. The the shift in the 21st century from simply collecting on foreign nation states has now moved over to a need to collect on subnational terrorist organizations, Islamic Jihad organizations, but as well other transnational organizations such as criminal organizations with which both the nation states and the terrorist organizations work and collaborate very closely in some instances. The CIA also conducts covert activities, and that would be under the authority of the president and usually with an intelligence finding is what they would call that. Within the CIA are these different directorates. As you all know, it is headquartered out at Langley, Virginia. The National Security Agency, this is the one that does the SIGINT, right? This is the one where Edward Snowden worked before he went wandering. Formed 1952, a bit after World War II, and it is responsible for collecting all kinds of signals intelligence, electronic eavesdropping, if you will, worldwide, not domestically. Never mind what Edward Snowden says, not domestically, except in those instances where an American citizen, American national or person would be in contact from the United States with or to a terrorist organization, for instance, or someone else in a foreign country that the NSA was collecting on. Their headquarters up in Fort Meade, Maryland. The Department of State, a very important member of the intelligence community, and one of those departments with which I worked very closely over the years because, of course, I served abroad in embassies. I was under State Department cover. That meant that I actually did a job all day long, and then everybody else went home or off to the movies or the swimming pool or something, and then I went out and did my second job. But the State Department is the organization, of course, that has the mission to conduct foreign affairs for the United States and to be in charge of our embassies and other diplomatic facilities abroad, which include consulates, too. Today, Secretary of State is John Kerry, but the specific element of the State Department that is a member of the intelligence community is this Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And so that is headed by Daniel Smith. And that element is quite small, actually, within the State Department, which is huge. But this INR section of it is a smaller element, and they provide the intelligence support specifically for the use of U.S. diplomats and the top-level officials of the State Department, headquartered, as is the State Department in Washington, D.C. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, another new one, came into being right after 9/11, as you heard Carly talking about. This one combined existing former agencies into it. Some of those included the Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Border Patrol. So they are responsible for intelligence collection, analysis, information sharing, intelligence management, headquartered Washington, D.C. Coast Guard Intelligence is actually part of a DHS. That is one of those agencies that was subsumed under it when it was formed. And they have a very particular mission that relates to our sea littoral, the area of the waters around the United States. Department of Justice includes under it a number of different organizations. The Attorney General today, of course, Eric Holder. This one goes way back. You see, founded 1870. So goes way back to shortly after the foundation of our republic. Subordinate elements include both the FBI and DEA. We'll look at both of those. FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Today, the director is James Comey. Protect and defend the U.S. against terrorist and foreign intelligence threats, etc. This is our domestic intelligence agency. The CIA's responsibility and area of operation is abroad. The FBI's responsibility is domestic. Not to say that the FBI doesn't have to pay attention to what's going on abroad. It certainly does, and now they have what they call legats, or legal attaches posted to embassies abroad, because obviously, as we know, in a far more interconnected world than we've ever had before, threats over there can very quickly become threats over here. And so there is supposed to be, ideally, close cooperation and coordination between the CIA and the FBI. Of course, as you know, that was one of the primary problems prior to 9/11, that they did not communicate. There was a wall between them. Now, I mean, obviously, there has to be a separation of domestic responsibility, foreign responsibility, and who collects where. That's appropriate. But they were not sharing information. They did not have the mechanisms. You heard the term stovepiped. Information went up and down, up, but it did not cross over laterally, and that was part of the problem for why we were taken so much by surprise with the attacks of 9/11. The FBI actually had information about some of the hijackers who were in this country, and yet that information did not make it to the CIA in time to stop the attacks. We could say a lot more about the FBI, but let's go on here. Drug Enforcement Administration. This is the one, of course, that goes after narco-traffickers, cartels, and all of the rest of that. Works, obviously, under the Department of Justice and very closely with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. Department of Energy. This is the one that is most responsible for maintaining U.S. energy security. And this would also have to do with safeguarding not just our nuclear laboratories and our nuclear facilities of different kinds, including reactors, but also being aware of the attempts of other hostile intelligence services to include nation-state services, but also terrorist organization intelligence, because yes, they do have a hierarchy, they are organized, they do have intelligence divisions within them. Take Hezbollah, for example, one of the most highly hierarchical administrative organizations you'll find on the face of the earth. They have a very serious intelligence capability, and this would be part of the responsibility of DOE in the energy security area. Department of the Treasury. This is one that goes way back, but it is the Office of Terrorism and Financial Analysis that actually belongs to the Intelligence community specifically. And this is, again, another one of these places where the threats of yesteryear are not the threats of today. Formerly, we would have to talk about nation-state threats to our financial system. North Korea printing high-quality $100 bills, counterfeiting, right? Well, now today, Iran has provided Hezbollah top-of-the-line printing capability, which they've located in the Bekaa Valley, and they too run off very high-quality U.S. and other denomination notes, euros, for example. It's one of the reasons why there was a wholesale drawing of our bills. Remember, not so long ago, where all of the designs were redone and there were new security features included into the paper and all sorts of things. That's because, not nation states, because subnational jihadist organizations like Hezbollah were counterfeiting our bills with the help and support of the nation state of Iran, which is its sponsor, and Hezbollah is its proxy. But that goes to show you a little bit about how the threat has changed and morphed over time. Right, the Department of Defense, there are a whole bunch, as you can see, of different agencies within the intelligence community that fall under the Department of Defense. The top of these, of course, is DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, but all the rest of these. So let's go through these a little bit quickly. Primary one, as I said, DIA, and that's the intelligence agency for our military, for the Pentagon. And their mandate includes collection as well as analysis and production, dissemination of finished intelligence products. NSA is under the Department of Defense. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, 1996. You can tell how new this science is by the year that one was established. National Reconnaissance Office goes back to '61, but this one also very much involved with our spy satellites, eyes in the sky. IMINT, remember the list of INTs? Imagery information, that's these guys, NRO. And the Cyber Command, one of the very newest of our intelligence community agency members. And again, you can see by the date of establishment, 2009, how recently this has become a concern. The U.S. Cybercom, it's sometimes called, has the responsibility for cyberspace operations, both defensive and offensive, against the entire gamut of potential adversaries in the world. And again, that is not just nation states anymore and their intelligence services. It is subnational Islamic jihadist organizations like Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, yes, the Islamic State too. So that they're responsible for all of that. Air Force has its own reconnaissance office, National Air and Space Intelligence Center. INSCOM is one that is located very close by to Washington, D.C., headquartered at Fort Belvoir. And that one is more tactical in a way for providing this kind of on-the-ground intelligence to our fighting troops in the field. National Ground Intelligence Center. Marine Corps Intelligence has its own unit of intelligence. Office of Naval Intelligence. That is the oldest one. Let me point that out. The oldest member of the U.S. intelligence community formed 1882. It goes that far back. It was formed very shortly, by the way, within 80 years or so of the Navy itself. And the Navy itself, of course, was formed by Thomas Jefferson. And the reason that Thomas Jefferson found the need to have a Navy, why? Because the Barbary pirates, we call them, but what were they? They weren't really pirates. They were maritime jihadis coming out of the Tripolitan states of North Africa, which are still to this day jihadist states. All right, let me stop there because I want to make sure you've got enough time for questions, and thank you very much. I'm going to let you all pass the mic from person to person, and I'll keep one.
Thank you. Hi. Question I have is, we talk about these famous things in Washington we like to have, stovepipes. You had one stovepipe as a result of 9/11 going up to DNI. You had another one we didn't spend a lot of time on, which is DHS going down, which is another bureaucracy. And the question I have for Sheriff Clarke is, with the need for rapid information sharing, we've had 13 years to put these structures in place. Are these part of the problem or are they part of the solution? Are they getting effectiveness? Are you getting the data you need at the fusion centers? Or how effective are we? Are we going up or not?
Better than we were prior to 9/11. We're not where we need to be. So this has been that heavy lifting that I talked a little bit about in terms of reform. Some of this has to do with the fact that we don't have the structures in place, because if you've got disparate agencies, their reporting systems, their sharing systems, if they're not compatible with ours, it makes it difficult. We're back into that realm where you have to call an agency or call someone and say, hey, what can you tell me about this, this, and this, instead of me with secure access being able to go in and get it myself. So we don't really have the structures in place yet for this seamless sharing of information, which is what they call it. Highly problematic.
Let me add something to that, which does bear on Department of Homeland Security, but others as well in the intelligence community. Something I think that we have lost or become not as good at anymore is human. It is the collection of information from people. It is also a CI awareness, counterintelligence awareness. In particular, as regards the new totalitarian threat in the world today, which is the global Islamic movement, Islamic jihad movement. Now, previously in the Cold War, I think we did a pretty good job going up against the totalitarian regime of the Soviet Union of the time. But now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of communism, there was a lapse, in a way, within the intelligence community, particularly the CIA, and I can speak to that more directly, but we lost the sense of having constantly to be on guard against infiltration and subversion, which were terms that we took very seriously and learned from, you know, first days on the job as young new officers. They're not realizing anymore today that we face exactly as serious, if not more serious, threat of infiltration and subversion, not just those who are trying to steal our secrets or you know, capture the codes to this and that. That's still part of it. But when it comes to the Islamic Jihad threat, somehow our guard has been let down. And unfortunately, what we're seeing today is that members and affiliates and associates, in particular of the Muslim Brotherhood, have deeply infiltrated our intelligence community, in particular the CIA, also the FBI, but DHS too. And I'll give you a really quick example. I know we're running out of time, but this has made the news very recently with regard to DHS, and that is that in an effort to support the current administration policy of working with the Muslim Brotherhood in this country, DHS, which is responsible for keeping databases of names with derogatory information about those with connections to terrorism, such as Hamas, which is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, they have actually, within DHS, issued orders for the last 5 years to go into the databases and scrub the information about Muslim Brotherhood members coming in and out of the country so that they don't get flagged or have to go to secondary. This is what's crippling us right now.
One other thing to add quickly to that, and I'll get you this stuff. I did a policy paper on how they do it in the UK, how they do intelligence, MI5. I'll send that to you if you want to see that. They do it a lot different. They don't have these disparate agencies. All intelligence by any agency that has responsibility in the UK goes to MI5, one location. Also, we had the same issue with the military, and we were able to bridge that lack of sharing data through the Goldwater-Nichols Reform Act, and some people suggest that as a model for the intelligence community. That's sort of bringing together for a seamless operation. So I'll get you this stuff as well. I think he
I have the mic. All right. My first question, I have two quick questions. First one is for Ms. Lopez. As you said, the U.S. Cyber Command is a fairly new intelligence agency. As you probably know your history, the Air Force was originally part of the U.S. Army, and then as air warfare became more prominent, that prompted the need for a U.S. Air Force. As more cyber war is going on, most notably the North Korean hacks, would you see it possible for the U.S. to create another branch of the military to just deal with cyber warfare?
Well, I mean, this intelligence community member is just that, and that's what its mission is. You know, as I said before, this is a threat that is just absolutely exploding. Before, as I said, our primary threat that we had to think about were other nation states and their intelligence capabilities. Today, you've got an organization like Anonymous, okay? What is Anonymous? It's a conglomeration of nation states that include Russia, China, Iran, also includes subnational terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, as well as your, run-of-the-mill, hacker anarchists around the world. That is what Anonymous is. Let me give you another example. And the threat, the level of the kind of threat that we're facing, which probably not just the military needs to face, but our entire government, and that is just recently, at the end of last year, I think about November, a private U.S. company called Cylance, C-Y-L-A-N-C-E, issued an alarming report, and they called it Operation Cleaver. And Operation Cleaver was a report about the capabilities of the Iranian cyber capability. And it recounted in this report that Iran's cyber capabilities now are so advanced that they have gained access to all of our critical infrastructure facilities: electricity, transportation, banking, water, fuel, you name it. All of the elements of our critical infrastructure. Iran already has access and can manipulate those right now, today. They have that capability not just with the United States, but according to this report, another 15 different countries that include advanced Western countries like Australia and Canada and Western Europeans, also Israel. So this is the kind of threat that we're facing now, and so your question about, what is going to be, I guess, sufficient to handle this kind of a broad spectrum threat, probably not just a military command, but this is going to have to be much broader than that, I think, and involve across the government capability, intelligence capability, but also partnership with private industry and private, in each of these critical infrastructure areas. You follow up there?
Yeah, I'm following.
Go ahead.
No follow-up, I'm just listening
No?
to you.
Okay. All right, Fred?
The U.S. Department of State has arguably the finest foreign language program in the world, and DOD has a nice one in Monterey, California, too. Could you discuss how important it is for intelligence agents to be able to not only speak but understand foreign languages?
It makes all the difference in the world. I came to the CIA already with a love of languages. I started high school with German. Our girls' high school was so cruel to the German teacher that he left after 1 year. And so I couldn't study German anymore. Then I started studying French. I picked up Russian in graduate school. And then the CIA taught me more Russian, taught me Spanish, taught me Bulgarian. It's critically important, and I know this from firsthand experience serving in the field. Those people in the field, be they at the State Department, at our embassies and consulates, or from the intelligence community like me, without being able to communicate in the local language, you're to get out and about more. They could enjoy the local culture more. They could be more successful in whatever professional, endeavor they were there for in the first place. And others who didn't have the language were sort of clustered in little American communities wondering why there wasn't a McDonald's on every block, and you're in Kazakhstan or someplace. No disparagement of Kazakhstan, I'm sure they do have McDonald's, but the point being that they clustered in American communities because they didn't have the confidence to step out into the host community, and it just makes all the difference from enjoying your tour to accomplishing your mission.
Newt recently said we should be investigating the financial influences of foreign countries. What are we currently doing on that?
So if you, I don't know, heard all of the question there, it was about a suggestion by Newt Gingrich recently made that we ought to be really on the alert about the activities of foreign hostile or adversary nations in the financial system. Well, in the back of the room right now, we've got Kevin Freeman with us. Kevin is the author of 2 books and has delved deeply into this subject. And he could really answer this probably a lot better than I am, so I should probably give him the mic. But just very briefly, we're in trouble. We're in a lot of trouble. Do you want to have a word, Mike? Kevin?
Chinese offering of Alibaba acquiring $25 billion If you want more information on the solution, though, we have some brochures on that on your way out as well.
Thank you very much.